Welcome to Mastering Datorama Fundamentals. I'm Ross Jenkins, a Salesforce marketing champion and the CEO of Decision Foundry, a Salesforce implementation partner. I'm also joined today with Ankit Bhandari, who is our technical manager. Special note, for purpose of this conversation, I'm going to use terms like Datorama, marketing cloud intelligence, or simply just the platform. Please consider these terms as being interchangeable. Before we can go forward, let's take a step back. We began our journey with episode 1 around data onboarding within the platform, where we covered such things as hygiene, basic integrations, custom calculations, and reporting. In episode 2, we covered off on the data model, as well as harmonization rules. Episode 3, my personal favorite, we covered off on custom data classifications. And that leads us to today. Episode 4, Data Visualization. A few helpful resources as we move forward. We ask that you join our Datorama experts group on LinkedIn. Second, that you go to decisionfoundry.com and opt in and download any resources associated with this series. 3, we strongly encourage you to go to Salesforce Trailhead and connect with the broader Marketing Cloud community. And finally, go to DF and look across all our various paid, owned, and earned properties where you can download case studies, checklists, webinars, and other associated creative. So, to begin our discussion, there's been a lot of focus around visualization, specifically the platforms, what they can and cannot do. And as a result of that, we tend to miss a very important mark. It's information design. Information design is a term that's been existing for about 50 years, and it focuses on the clarity of information, its efficiency, and ultimately its accessibility. At Decision Foundry, we believe that when information is made clear, whatever the medium, it allows our end users to make better decisions. I'm going to leave you with 3 principles as we move forward. The first, as we think about visualization and we go beyond the tools, we visualize for impact, for outcomes, to help our audiences understand performance. 2, that as we start to put together our dashboards, that we don't forget to assign specific targets and goals, and to make them specific to individuals and not just the organization. And finally, of all the measures that we can ultimately track within our platforms, platform adoption almost always seems to be the very last thing. Consider that first before all things. So briefly, who is Decision Foundry? Well, at the core, we are a data and analytics consultancy. We just happen to be a Salesforce implementation partner. Our focus, Marketing Cloud, CDP, personalization, engagement, and ultimately intelligence. By the numbers, we've been around a while. To date, we've completed over 500 projects, and by the end of the year, we'll probably cover 60 more. We are an organization of 144, but 53 of those individuals are focused on delivering Marketing Cloud implementation solutions. And finally, we've been around 9 years. So let's talk about Datorama, what it's known for. It's a Salesforce software as a service platform. It is great in ETL. It is outstanding in terms of reporting automation. But is it in fact a visualization tool? Despite the fact that it uses interactive filters, time comparison charts, switch metrics, spend goal comparisons, and basic pacing, it still isn't quite a visualization tool, at least not in the traditional sense. But in fact, that's okay, because what it actually does better than any other platform in this space, in my opinion, is it gives you the tools to generate effective data communication strategies. And that is reflected in the visualization tab that we'll communicate and showcase later today. So let's take a pretty commonplace example that we're showcasing here. What makes this a pretty good output using what used to be called Datorama Canvas? Well, first of all, it's got great organizing principles as a whole. It's got good spacing in terms of allowing for appropriate branding and logos. there's a logical grouping that we can easily identify. It has a hierarchy for what is and is not important. And it does allow for some degree of custom visualizations, of which we will cover off on. Now, here's the reality, is that Datorama can be extended far beyond what it currently showcases out of the box. And we call that data communication. The value of Datorama can be extended through the use of design, CSS, aka cascading style sheets, HTML, and JavaScript frameworks. At Decision Foundry, we call that data UX work. And we have been pioneering that for the better part of 8 years. Now, how exactly is it applied and how does that look? Well, let's take a specific automotive example where this particular provider is looking across any number of different metrics. And what they're really focusing on is nameplate analytics and media performance. Now, for my liking, there's a little bit too much activity that's going on here. But when you put this under the lens of data UX, something like this might look something like this, fully designed within Datorama. But before we sort of, raise our hands and say this is a great example, it is missing a couple of key component pieces. It's missing the data narrative. What are the questions we're really trying to answer here? And for a large OEM, it might be, how does marketing move machinery? How does it move the various units? How do we drive more car sales? These are the important questions that we need to answer, not things like, what are the data sources we have available and what are the necessary joins that we have? Those are secondary questions. Let's focus on what the business impact is for the end audience and then design the interface, the UX around that. We can take that same principle around data UX and apply that to, say, a global software as a service provider. We can do something fairly standard and say, as an analyst, we want to provide automated insights. We want to categorize the way we are performing. And we want to do that not just in a visual way, we want to do that through words. And this is a very commonplace approach to do this through a rich text widget, which Ankit will show a little bit later. But what if we could take this particular output and make it look something like this under the lens of data UX? This is when we apply CSS and a certain degree of JavaScript that is easing and flowing and a certain degree of minimal animation to engage the end audience. Let's take another example, creative analysis, which is very, very popular for a lot of verticals that we work in. And in this instance, what we've done is we've borrowed a particular carousel effort from Materialize CS. You can go to their website right now and see almost this exact instance. So we go previous and next, we can look at any number of creative, and potentially we can overlay any kind of performance measures. But this version doesn't quite pay it off. Perhaps this one does. But this can all sound a little bit academic. And you might say, well, this is all just Photoshop that you've put together. But seeing is believing, and everything is Photoshop until it isn't. So right now we're looking at the Datorama platform properly. And I'm going to take you back to when we actually began our journey in thinking about data experience design and data UX. And we start off with something very simple, which is forms. And we started to stylize those forms and look at some basic business rules about what we could actually do in the platform and control more of the interface. We shifted. And ultimately we started thinking a little bit about how navigation might be moved. So how do we make navigation both informative and playful in a way that still made sense? And then we bring it all together here, similar to the example I showed you previously. But here's what's different. We take that materialized CSS output and we transform it. And every component here that you see in terms of the title or the specific data points or the highlighting rules that we leverage and the indicators that are applied here can all be dynamically set in the platform. We can take another example of a goal gauge, which is fairly traditional within Datorama, and we can restylize it and bring it to the next level. We can even kind of create our own custom rules around sort of levels of granularity, and we can even reference external websites. Shifting another example, I can bring in the element of animation. Right now, animation should never be overdone, but in the context of the experience, when done right, can actually enhance the overall user experience. A few more examples. Although Datorama is certainly known for having any number of widgets that are available within its repertoire, there are some things that are occasionally missing, and you'd like to bring those in. So although Datorama supports JavaScript frameworks like D3 and HighCharts, not everything is available or compatible. But here's a good example of leveraging a line chart with annotations, and we'll bring this forward a little bit later during our presentation. We can also use a classic waterfall chart, which I remember trying to develop something like this in Datorama almost 8 years ago for a media agency. Well, here you are. And then we can have the capacity to completely change what Datorama looks like within the platform using what is commonly used in sort of the web application world as the parallax effect. Wonderful. So moving forward here, we can look specifically at the various dashboard templates and the things that we can do with CSS and HTML. And these can be great things. But how do you go and develop something like this when your starting point looks a little bit more like this? Well, fortunately for us, I've also brought Ankit Bhandari, who is our lead technical manager, and we're going to go from what's possible to all the principles associated with that delivery. Ankit, without further delay, take it away.
Thanks, Ross. And let me just share my screen. So while we log into Datorama, just going to give a quick intro of myself. So my name is Ankit Bhandari. I'm based out of Calcutta, India, and I've been working with Decision Foundry for the last 6 years, predominantly on marketing cloud intelligence itself. And the hope here is that I can, I can impart some of the wisdom that I've gained over the years on this tool with the audience, with you guys who are watching this. So let's get right into it then. And before I go into each component that I want to take you guys through, let me just take you guys through a basic summary of where we are heading with this particular presentation, right? With this particular session. So what we basically want to kind of impart here is, firstly, step A in creating a dashboard, right? How do you create a basic standard view within Datorama using the native tools, using the native capabilities that Datorama allows us to use? And then how do you go from dashboard to data UX, as Ross has mentioned before, right? How do you go from A to B, which is this, right? How do you improve on something that you've created with, with a very basic lens? How do you expand on that? How do you scale that into something that is much more structured, much more clean, much more readable, and attracts users from the go, right? So before we get into all of that, let's take a few steps back and first look at the visualization section that we're going to be focusing on. As you can see here, what it consists of is basically collections, templates, and highlighting rules. Collections is nothing but a set of dashboards. So what you see here is collections, 2 collections that we have in this particular workspace, and what you see within those are the dashboards, that form a part of those collections, right? There are no restrictions on the number of collections or dashboards that you can have. Templates are basically, copying the style, copying the design, copying the structure of a dashboard, which is then easily migratable to any amount of workspaces that you want. And all you have to do is just use a template, create something, and just align it with your backend. So it's a quick fix, right? And talking about templates, Ross has showcased, Decision Foundry's enormous repository of templates, which with the session you will also have an idea of where you can find these, right? So how do you create all of these, right? How do you create a collection? Very simply, just go to all collections, hit on create new, and you have basic settings to add. The most important thing to look at is, who you're sharing it with, because who you share your data with is very important. So that should be in your control. Same with dashboards. You go to any existing collection, you have an add new here. You can create one from scratch. You can use a dashboard template. You can create one from app pages as well. In terms of templates, the way to create them is, when you have a collection, you can create a collection template directly by selecting the collection, going to more actions, or right-clicking on the collection you want and create template. Similar with dashboard, simply right-click on the dashboard you want and create a template. Highlighting rules, as the word suggests, it's basically how you highlight certain data points, which is very important, which is what gives immediate insight to the user. This is something we'll get into during our session, during when we go into how to create widgets, right? We'll go into highlighting rules and how to create those. So now coming back to where we want to start with the basic Datorama dashboard, using the native widgets, and not going over the board with it, right? So before we get into that, just a bit of context as to what you're seeing in front of you. This is basically a simple dashboard that we created. So when we create a dashboard, we have to answer certain questions for ourselves, and then those lead to further questions that we can then ask, right? So the questions would be, what is the purpose of the dashboard, right? And who are the stakeholders that I'm creating it for? Once you answer these two, then you can start asking questions that you want the dashboard to answer, and then create a dashboard and create a story that answers all of those questions that you've asked. So what we've done is taken a simple example of, let's say, a company that's doing digital marketing across a few channels. Brand awareness is one of their KPIs, conversions another one, and the stakeholder in this case is someone are basically people from the leadership. So what we've done is we've created something very an overview of something, a summary of something, and not gone in depth with it, because again, based on the stakeholder, you can decide how detailed your dashboard needs to be and how it needs to be structured, right? And then as far as the structure is concerned, it's very simple. You have on the top, you have all the interactive elements, you have the insights, you have the filters, interactive filters. Then you get into the KPIs, a few key metrics that people want to track, that they want to look at immediately. Then you come down to the pacing section, and you have the pacing goal as well with it. Moving on, you have the temporal section where you can you can look at data, day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, however you want to, and then a basic summary view, on a table, in a tabular format, right? So now let's go into this and let's start deconstructing some of these, and let's start looking at how we got there, right? How we performed all of this, how we came to this particular view. So the first thing when you edit a page is you look at the page level settings. So if you want to add certain filters, to filter data from maybe certain sources for certain channels, however you want to, you can add filters simply at the page level. You can also do the same at the widget level if you want to do it for specific widgets. And then there's the design element, again, at the page level, so that you can do something that encompasses the entire page rather than having to do the same thing over and over again for each and every widget, right? So you have things like, selecting the background color, image, filters you want, the layout of the page, right? That's very important. What widget settings do you want? What kind of fonts do you want on your page? And you can go into advanced, into custom CSS, right? So for our case, in dashboard A, we've not used any of these. So let's go into individual widgets and how you create these, right? So let's start with, one on the top, the most basic one. And before we get there, so the way you create any widget is by pressing the plus icon here, and immediately on the left pane, you can see Datorama's entire widget library that's at your disposal. So it starts with the basic native charts and graphs that you have. It goes into the interactive elements as we've discussed, and then at the end is whatever is not native to Datorama. Datorama still allows you to do by customizing your own widgets, by creating your own, and Ross mentioned this, creating your own CSS, your own HTML, your own JavaScript, and creating your own widgets, right? So this is the widget library that you have, and selecting any of these enables you to create those widgets. So let's start from the top. Let's start from what we have here. This is a very simple rich text widget. The use case that we've created for this is simply allowing people to add insights to the dashboard so that a user can come in and immediately get, a level of information without having to go through the data, right? So, the way you do it is just basically hitting on the edit button, and someone can literally type in the insights. You can select fonts and, font size and all of that. With this, I also want to show you, and Ross mentioned this again, basically how you can use the same thing to kind of do a bit of automated insights with the data that you have, right? So again, I'm going to create a rich text widget from scratch. And just to give you context of what I'm trying to do here, right, before we get into the technicalities of it, what I'm trying to do here, for example, is, let's say I want to say that campaign XYZ is the top performer with ABC impressions. And I want to automate this, right? So first thing I need to understand is what are the elements I want to automate. So I want to automate the fact that which campaign is that? That campaign should pop up immediately. What are the impressions, right? Those that should pop up immediately. So in order to do that, the widget needs to have the data in there that you can then query out, right? So first thing I'm going to do is add those data points in here. So you have campaign name is what we want, and we want impressions, right? So I'm going to add those two data points in here. And then now, before I go back into the edit part and start querying things, again, I need to think about something. I'm looking for top performer, right? So let's go through some of these settings and just check if everything is in place for me to do what I want to do. So design is going to be straightforward, nothing to worry about here. But if you look at the filters, you have a filter, you have the sorting setup, and you're sorting all by campaign name. That's not what we want, right? What we want basically is top one, and we want it sorted by impressions. So we do that here so that now everything is set up in the backend for me to now go into the query and start looking at how I can automate this. So if you look at this here in the rich text editor, you can query data points, you can filter based on data points, and you can create a table. What we need here is query. So I'm going to click on query. I'm going to copy this part, and then I'm going to have to change certain elements of this to align it to what I want. So in terms of field name, the first thing I want here is campaign name, right? So I'm going to type campaign name. In terms of type, this is going to be none, and delimiter, since we're looking at top one, it's not necessary, but I'm going to have to add it in anyways. And again, in terms of the number of impressions, so immediately, if you look at the widget, you can see campaign one is populated as the top performing campaign. Now let's see how many impressions this campaign has recorded, right? So again, I'm going to go in and I'm going to put the names in. So I say impressions. In terms of type, again, I just added that as none, and delimiter as underscore. And as you can see, that's the top performing campaign with 16,289 impressions. So this is how you can use the same widget for a different purpose and get your data point in, add some automated insight into your dashboard, right? Now moving on to some of the other widgets. So let's look at the next set of widgets that we have. Interactive filters, extremely important for a dashboard, right? People need to have data cuts according to the variables that they want. So interactive filters are very important. How do you create them, right? A simple, again, plus button, search for a filter, and just create this. And all you have to do then is add the data point that you need in here. So in our case, we've added channel. I'm going to add that again. Very quickly, going to give you a pro tip over here, just in terms of how Datorama works in the backend. When you ingest any data in Datorama, even if you delete it later, the dimension values always get stored and they always remain. You have a way to delete them, but that's a separate conversation. But in the backend, the dimension values will always stay, right? So what's going to happen in certain cases is, even though you do not have data against, let's say, a certain channel or let's say a certain campaign, you're going to see it in the drop down. The easiest way to avoid that is, instead of using native Datorama dimensions, just create one which is going to be the same dimension. So in this case, it's going to be campaign name, but what we're going to do is we're going to associate it with a measurement. So in our case, let's say impressions, right? So we're associated with impressions, and what Datorama is doing is it's only going to show us those campaigns that have impressions associated with them, right? So that's just a pro tip, just because this is a case where we've seen people see values that are unnecessary, unwanted, and they don't have data associated with them anyway. So why am I seeing these values? So that's something to keep in mind. Then moving on, this is a status bar. A time comparison status bar is what we use, simply because A regular status bar will give you, overall values, but time comparison always adds context to your data, which is something that's very important to have, right? So that's why we use the time comparison. And the way this works is simply by adding, what is the time that, you want to compare it week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter. So you select the date dimension here, and you select the measurement you want to compare, and then certain additional settings. You can add filters to it. This is going to remain the same for all the widgets, these 3 tabs, right? Now, a limitation that we've seen with this widget, right, is firstly the areas. They could be a little cleaner, a little more easy to read, firstly. And secondly, there is a bit of a restriction in terms of how you want to have these time periods, selected, right? For a regular user, when they're looking at something, it's preset by the person who created it. If they want to make certain changes, they are not able to do that. While this is a restriction to the widget, if you think out of the box, you can always solve for it. So one of, I'm just going to showcase something that we can do with this to get the time periods in our control. A widget that I personally like a lot is compare dates, right? Because it enables you to compare date ranges across, mostly all your widgets, most of your widgets. So in this case, I'm going to select this, impressions widget, which is associated with this. And now let's say my current, my current period is going to be March, and I want to compare March data to February data. And here you go. So now what's happening is week over week, week 1 of March is being compared to week 1 of Feb, week 2 of March, week 2 of Feb, etc., right? So this gives you the flexibility to do that. So again, like with this, just a pro tip again here is that within Datorama, you need to explore and you need to kind of look through all the different options that you have, because from my personal experience, there's mostly never something that you can't do at all. There's always a way. You just have to work a little harder and find it, right? So let's go into some of the other widgets that we have here. So the goal widget, this is again a very native Datorama goal widget. Understand that, to create a goal widget, you need to create a goal in the backend using Analyze and Act. This cannot be done through, let's say, simple calculations and stuff like that. You have to create a goal in the backend and then, have that added to the widget to then showcase. And then, looking at the tables, again, like a simple thing, again, you have to click on the plus sign, select a table, simple Datorama table. But again, like, go through all of these sections, go through everything that you have at your disposal, because somewhere or the other, you will find things that you can do. Like in this example, you can, add a share of total with it, either show instead or show with. You can add time comparison here as well to the table, right? So always explore as much as you can. Then coming to dimension and metric selector, which again, it's something that there was a very, very good addition to Datorama, because this allows you to cater to multiple audiences with, within the same view, because different people might want to view different cuts of data. With these selectors, you give people the option to view exactly what they want to view. And, just in terms of the different settings that you have here, whether you want the mode to be switch, where you switch out the measurement or dimension from the table, or you add to what's already on the table, you have the option to set a default value. Always apply it to the widgets you want to. Always select this, otherwise it's going to apply to the entire page, and that can really mess up the page when people are selecting different things. And then coming back, one of the last widgets I want to cover here is the trend line. Simple widget, right? Straightforward. You'd think, what more can we really do with it? What more settings could we really find? But again, if you go into it, you will see that there's a lot that you can change here. You can change the display, you can change the marker type. You can even add calculations. Like I want to add an average here. So if you see, there's a dotted line, which, shows the average throughout this period, right? Even if you want to add forecast and different forecast models, you can do that. Again, a pro tip here is, when you add multiple measurements into this, the axis or the scaling that happens, based on the values that you have for the measurement. So if you see here, even though this only comes up to, let's say, 360 or 500, whereas this goes up to 3K, you're seeing it quite close. Sometimes that's fine, but sometimes you might not want that. The way to control that is the axis that you see here. So this is on y-axis 1. This will be on y-axis 2, as you can see right here. Just set it back to the same axis, and everything readjusts to what you want to see, right? Now I can move on. Before I move on to the next page, I want to talk quickly about the basic principles that we look at when we're creating dashboards. That I personally look at three basic principles: scalability, maintenance, and sustainability, right? And through this, I will give you examples of where we look at these. So to start with scalability, right? Initially, when you're creating a dashboard, you need to really stress on the structure of the dashboard, because if you've set up the right structure, then your dashboard automatically is scalable. And why I say that is because that's exactly what we've done, right? If you look at A and you look at B, the difference is stark, right? The difference, it's extremely noticeable. It's right in your face, but we've changed nothing in terms of the structure of the dashboard. If you look at the entire dashboard, it is literally the same length, it is the same number of widgets, and it has the same sections as well. But because we had a structure, we were able to scale up, and just by doing some design work, by changing, let's say, the font, changing the background color, adding some background image to it, adding more context in terms of a header and a footer, and even section headers, making the structure more pronounced, right? We've come up to such a stark difference, right? And that's what we want to go into now with this particular page, and deconstruct some of these and how we came about creating something like this. So again, it always starts from the same. When you hit edit, the first thing you have to look at is the page level filters or design, whatever that is. So in our case, the page level design has been updated. So we've added a background image, we've changed the background color, we've added a certain level of opacity. We have set up even settings so that every widget you create automatically comes with a default setting. So again, various things that we've changed in all of this, right? Even the font of the page, as I mentioned, right? Just to give it a cleaner look and feel, make data more readable for the audience, right? And last but not the least, custom CSS work, right? To give it that little more oomph. So this is something, again, Ross has spoken about, I've spoken about. We'll go into how we do this. The codes will always be available within our repository. We won't have enough time to go in and break down the codes for you, but the codes will be available in the repository, right? So let's go into some of these different elements, right? As you can see, we've even changed some of the widgets to completely custom widgets. So let's go into some of these elements, right? And I want to start from bottom. I want to start from something most simple and then go into some of the things that are more complicated to do, right? To start with is the heat map table. I mean, you've seen the same table on the other side. We've hardly changed this. A Datorama native table. All we've done again is added a bit of CSS into this to make it look cleaner, more readable, and also we've changed the color palette so that it amalgamates with the rest of the page. So what's happening here is we've made a very small change, but the impact is quite large, right? So sometimes you need to think about it in that sense, that you don't always need a large change to make a large impact. Sometimes you need to look at the minute details as well. Same thing goes for the metric selector and the dimension selector on top, right? It looks different, but all we've done is added a little bit of custom CSS to overlay it, and created something that looks much better than that looks much cleaner, and that's much more readable. A little bit of animation on it as well. And as you can see, the footer over here, so again, adding a footer to a page always helps, where you have a question, where it's best to view, and also the back to top, right? Which we can also do within the section headers. For a longer page, you can add a next section, previous section, back to top on section headers as well. Right. And now moving on to some of the more complex widgets that, the custom widgets that we've created. So this is, again, something I spoke about earlier. Simple trend graph. What more can you do with it? But there's always more you can do with something. So in our case here, what we've done is we've added annotations to it. Immediate advantage to someone who's coming to the page, without wasting any time, they get a certain level of insight, straight off the bat, right? So this is something that we've done with a trend chart. Now, before I move on to other custom widgets, I want to take a second and quickly show you guys how to create a custom widget and what are the settings that you really have to focus on. So again, the creation part is very simple, where you click on the plus, select a custom widget, and what you get is this, right? So what you have to focus on is adding the data that's relevant that you want to show, and then editing this custom widget. Now this is going to be different, from a rich text that we saw earlier. So here you have to add your JavaScript, you have to add your HTML and CSS, and in certain cases you also have to add certain libraries, styles, scripts, so that everything can can work together to show the view that you're looking at. And again, you can look at codes from Highcharts T3. You just have to bring it into Datorama, work with the environment to manipulate them a little bit so that it sits with the Datorama environment, and it can populate perfectly as you want it, right? And then moving into the remaining sections. So again, like we showed you the spend gauge that was native to Datorama. And now what we've done is we've just upgraded that, and we've created our own spend gauge, which shows you the basic information about where it's spacing, but it also allows you to add more. And again, like this is something that Ross has also displayed previously in his session, where you add the month over month, the week over week, and again, something that links out where you can link it out to another page where you're forecasting the spends, right? You can link it out to another Google spreadsheet where you're providing insights about why the spend was so and so, why you're reaching. So you can do a lot with this, right? Just adding more utility to the same widget. Same way with the table, something like we showed you in the heat map. The table is the same, just made to look cleaner, structurally, more easy to read. But something very important here is how we've added the highlighting rules. Immediately highlights the data and shows people where things are going wrong or where things are working really well. And very quickly, to show you guys how to create highlighting rules, that would be something we showed you here. So you have highlighting rules, you add new. So in our case, right, let's say we want to create one for overpacing and underpacing. You have to select the colors that you want for that, and in your head you just have to understand what for you is overpacing and underpacing. So for us, let's say it's if it's greater than 100%, or if it's less than 75%, then it's about overpacing or underpacing for us. So just what you think is what you have to add here, and that's it, it's done. And the way to add it onto the dashboard is again very simple. Something we've shown before is going into the table, selecting the measurement, and you have the option of adding a highlighting to it. So to quickly show you that, so if I go here into pacing, you can see here I've added both the highlighting tools, right? All right, and now moving upwards to the next set of widgets. So we have the this is in comparison to the status bars that we've seen, the time comparison status bars that we've seen in Datorama, right? Here, what we're doing is basically, again, like just giving it a cleaner look and feel, making it more in line with the rest of the dashboard, as well as since this is custom scripting, you have more control over the time periods, right? What your previous period is, what this period is, you have control. You do not have to have a second widget acting on it. You just get all of that, with this, and you can set up the rules in this. And if you look at, we've also gotten rid of the areas which might have been a little more difficult to read. Here it's just making it a little more easy to read. Again, like it's all about how simple, how easy to read, and how clean your dashboard is, right? And again, like the insights graph that we showed you there, it was a manual insight, where someone had to go and type in. This is a custom widget. So the first thing is that you can connect it to an external data source. You can connect it to an Excel, external Google spreadsheet, and you can get the data automated in here. And also the carousel effect, right? You have multiple insights coming in, and they just keep scrolling through. And if you want to, you can always scroll by yourself as well. And at the end of it, just as important as you have a footer, it's as important to have a header as well, and a navigation bar. Now this navigation bar could be to navigate between different pages. It could be to navigate within the page as well to different sections if it's a lengthy page, right? So this is how we go through that entire transition that we've shown you. And again, like to pick up on the last 2 points that I was talking about, right? But in terms of principles, scalability, sustainability, and ease of maintenance. So when you're creating these custom widgets, you need to think about sustainability in the sense that people will be viewing this across different screen sizes. So when you're adding the code, and make sure that it's resizing different, based on the screen size. Otherwise, the data just gets lost, right? And similarly, what we do personally is we always add comments to the code in relevant places so that different people can look at it, change it, use it somewhere else, right? And become so easy to use and to maintain as well. And yeah, with that, that's my bit, and I'd like to hand it over to Ross, to go through the last few slides. Thank you, Ross, and over to you.
Ankit, that was fantastic. Thank you for bringing it all together here on our 4th episode of Mastering Datorama Fundamentals. So at this point, this particular session is publicly available. You may find it on Mastering Datorama, along with several associated resources and things that both Ankit and I referenced during this webinar. Just for inspiration, or just to kind of look at how we do things differently and sort of paying off on some of the slides and things that we showed you today, you can actually go to our repository that you can find at Datorama-dashboard over on decisionfoundry.com. Ultimately, if you're interested in learning more about any of the topics that we covered today, we ask that you maybe consider looking at our Master Datorama Fundamental training series, which we host every couple of months, publicly available. And ultimately, we'd like you to consider participating in future events. The next one will likely be sort of an advanced version of what we just talked about today, around further tips and tricks around data communication. And I think ultimately we'll get into Media Transparency Center. Next slide. So with some closing thoughts on all the things that we saw today, although I think our industries tend to rely heavily on what tools can and cannot do, I think that we're fundamentally missing a point here. It really is around information design. How do we make information more accessible? How do we make it more efficient? How do we sort of think about how do we communicate more in terms of words and presentation versus technically what we can do with graphs and line charts? I'll leave it with these 3 principles that I started at the beginning of the conversation. We need to visualize for performance first and foremost. Second, we need to create a level of accountability in all the various metrics that we're utilizing at both an organizational level and an individual level. So as an example, if you're looking at sort of trying to understand what your CPMs are or your overall cost pers, that particular assignment, who owns that particular KPI, someone needs to be assigned to it. And ultimately, of all the things that we can ultimately measure, and we do that quite well for our clients, the one big North Star metric that we almost always seem to miss is around adoption. Next slide. So my name is Ross Jenkins, and I was joined today by Ankit Bhandari. We have absolutely enjoyed talking to you today about data visualizations. Look for our upcoming sessions. The next one is titled Data Communication. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and do enjoy your time.